All right, let's get started. Thanks so much, all of you that have joined this executive briefing. It should be a very interesting topic. I'm Bob Perkins, and with the AAISP, if I think most of you know who we are, uh, we're the Global Inside Sales Association, dedicated to advancing individuals and teams. So, thanks again for joining us. Today's topic has to do with data, but more importantly, it has to do with how we're operating today in a very virtualized environment. Some of the marketing, lead generation, selling channels have changed, and we need to take a look at, is there some data that we're not leveraging, how to leverage it given this new environment. I'd like to introduce the speakers today. In fact, I'll turn it over to Elizabeth Walter, who is a board member with SalesIntel and former chief revenue officer with RainKing, to open us up. Welcome. Oh, one last thing I do want to mention. This is a very roundtable-ish kind of format. You can see many of the attendees here. Make sure you ask questions, use chat, get out there, make a comment. Again, feel free to turn your camera on or off. It's up to you, but let's make this interactive. With that, Elizabeth, all yours.
Great. Thanks very much, Bob. So I'm Elizabeth Walter, and although for the last 10 years or so, I have been very deep in the vendor side of the B2B data world. For 15 years prior to that, I was a practitioner. I was somebody who was the person evaluating, using, rolling these systems out within large enterprise and SaaS software companies. So that's really my interest and love of this. It's a lifelong love for me. Manoj.
Great. Thanks, Elizabeth, and thanks, Bob and ISP for organizing this this webinar and roundtable. So I'm Manoj Ramnani, founder and CEO of SalesIntel. We provide sales and marketing intelligence platform. When you unwrap the marketing wrapper, inside what we do, we provide the data and intelligence that the sales and marketing teams need to go achieve their revenue targets, achieve their revenue goals. Prior to that, I've been fortunate to have started companies in the federal space and in the education space. Before SalesIntel, I started a company named Circleback, where we were solving much like the same problems that the B2B sales and marketing teams experience, that their data is going out of date, there's not enough data, but at the consumer level, where all our address books are going out of date, right? 3% of people change jobs every single month. So Circleback had millions of users that were managing their address book, and we use the active asset crowdsourcing model, which we'll go get into as we get into the presentation.
Great. And also with us, we have Mike Burton. Mike.
Hey guys. Hey, good to be on with everybody. My name is Mike Burton. I'm one of the co-founders at Bombora. We're an intent data company in the B2B space. I'll apologize ahead of time if you hear a 2-year-old behind me at any point. I'll make sure to go on mute, but got some work from home stuff going on here. And yeah, so I think I've been with Bombora, we've been at it for about 7 years, which sounds crazy to say out loud. And then before that, I was a part of a few different B2B media businesses. So, companies that were selling lead generation programs and display advertising programs, pay-per-click advertising programs. And one of those businesses called Madison Logic actually incubated the Bombora intent data business. So we had this behavioral data. At the time, we called it behavioral data. Now it's called intent data. But at the time, we had this behavioral data, and it acted as a seed for what eventually spun out and became the Bombora business. So really, my background's been one evolution from media into data. And I'm glad to be on with Elizabeth and Manoj today, and data experts, and to have found myself in the B2B data world, because I think it's an exciting place to be. So good to meet everybody.
Great. Well, it sounds like I'm not the only one with the lifelong love of data here. Great. So we'll move into to our agenda, and the session topic, as Bob said, is about B2B data, the strategy, and then the execution of that, and the operationalizing of that within your systems. And we're going to start out with a little trip down memory lane and talk a little bit about the evolution of where all of this data has come from. There is a ton of different data now available on the market. So we'll focus in on what are the most important B2B elements for B2B marketers and salespeople, and then the considerations that you should keep in mind as you're evaluating the different players out there. There is just a flood of vendors on the market, and there are some very important considerations as you go through that evaluation. And then last, we'll finish off with some use cases around demand gen, marketing, and sales, and how to really get the most out of the data that you have. All right. So with that, Manoj, tell us where all this data comes from.
Absolutely. First of all, answer like which data, right? Many times when companies come in and say we need data, they don't define. I look at data as a 5-layer cake, if you will, right? At the foundation of that, you have the company, contact, then very recently, technographic and intent, have made its way in the market in last, what Mike just said, 6-7 years, right? It used to call behavioral data, now intent data. And then the news and intelligence that has always been there, right? Who should I contact and why should I contact? What's the reason for me to contact someone? And if you look at this layer, the news is public source, right? Company, in the world that we live in, every website has that company information. And over a period of time, companies, vendors have developed models to put each company in different firmographic, right? Which industry does it fall under? How big is the company in terms of revenue or in terms of the employee count that helps you filter? And all these data, the purpose of all the surrounding data is to help sales and marketing professionals focus in on their target market, focus in on who is really in the market, who should they talk to, because the resources are so limited, right? So I'll talk particularly about the context, right? Contact business has been there for centuries. My grandfather used to have a list, write it down, and he will give the list to his partner. I remember a 4, 5, 6-year-old, and then he will carry that list. Okay, here are the vendors that we need to go to business with, right? Then as you fast forward, the list here became a computerized list. Then you had companies like Infogroup way back, like 20 years ago, 25 years ago, they took those yellow pages and started digitizing it, right? And then from there came a company named Jigsaw. I don't know how many of you have heard Jigsaw as a company, but Garth Moulton and then Jim Fowler started the concept, both sales professionals. They said, you know what, there's no good list out there. How do we have salespeople contribute actively in a crowdsourcing model, data, and they trade it, and they started a phenomenal platform where you come in, you contribute the data, a contact, and you get a credit, and you could use that credit to get data when you need data, right? So this was the active crowdsourcing model. They had great success, right? Jigsaw was an iconic exit at that time. Salesforce paid almost $200 million for that. The challenge with the Jigsaw model was it was active crowdsourcing, right? Everybody has to come into this portal, put the data. Over a period of time, the engagement level went down, and people started to game the system where they put the Mickey Mouse, but then take Elizabeth Walter CRO at RainKing out, right? So the pond started to get polluted. From there, companies like Net Prospects came in. They said, you know what? Let's not rely on an individual. Let's have companies do crowdsourcing, provide dumps of data. The challenge is the accuracy level goes down. While Net Prospects was doing that, ZoomInfo came up with this whole concept. Hey, individuals already have contact in their email. Let's harvest that data. And then in parallel, you saw two companies, RainKing, where Elizabeth was the chief revenue officer, and Discover.org. They both relied on research, human research, to say, the accuracy of this crowdsourced data is just not enough for marketers to do large campaign reliably, or for salespeople to target their customers. Therefore, we are going to go and put the research teams on top. The data volume was very limited, but the accuracy was 95%. And I've seen in last decade being in the business, my last company, Circle Back, we solved this very problem for the consumers. As a result of it, we had exhaust data that powered most of the players in the industry, right? The backbone of the industry. And we saw this evolution where ZoomInfo continued to increase the accuracy of the data, but not quite there. but discovered old RainKing existed. And then in the last 3-4 years, the market's consolidated. What investors, savvy investors like Carlyle Group, they realize that there is a place in the market for both. There are organizations that need data quality, but smaller volume. And then there are organizations that need high volume of data. And then you see companies, larger companies, or even mid-sized companies buying data from, contact data from all these companies. So you see ZoomInfo emerge as a brand, and through the consolidation. So you see this evolution of active crowdsourcing model to editorial to now these two markets merge. I think where I see the world is heading, there's no right answer. I don't think the machines are, no matter which label you put AI or machine learning, are good enough to produce high quality data. At the same time, a human can scale. Ultimately, I believe where the world is going is you need the combination of both, where machine does 80-90% of the work, but then you have human in the loop that is keeping the data fresh and up to date. So hopefully that gives you an idea of the journey of last 20 plus years of contact data.
Yeah, and we'll pause there for a second in case anybody has questions. Feel free to put them in the chat or ask away. So as Manoj said, the industry has evolved quite a bit, and Mike, you've been there to see a lot of that evolution and been a big part of that evolution. So tell us from your perspective, how has the industry grown and matured?
Yeah, I think, there's the foundational data that Manoj was talking about, contacts and firmographics, have been around for a long, long time. Just this idea of, just broadly speaking, who are the customers I like to sell to, whether that's by industry or company size and revenue levels, kind of like those B2B foundational data. And then contacts, of course, Manoj's grandfather example is great. I think in the last 10 years, call it 10 years broadly, I can't speak to exactly as much precisely when technographic data came along, but if you look at technographic data and intent data, I think that it's fair to say that was a pretty big leap forward in terms of sophistication, right? So if technographics, all of a sudden, it creates this whole new element of identifying the who, right? And so when I say who, I mean what company, what account should I go after? The idea of technographics, let me identify companies that have installed specific technologies. This is a really big leap forward, right? Because you can have these broad industries, these broad company size ranges, but to be able to start to hone in based on companies that have installed specific technologies, that have rallied behind specific technology strategies, is certainly from a segmentation point or a sales intelligence standpoint, a big deal. And then a little while after that, intent data came along. And for a lot of folks, you might be saying 7 years, no way, it feels brand new. And yeah, it's been 7 years, believe it or not. There was probably 3 or 4 years where no one cared or no one was listening or it seemed fake. But somewhere along the way, we figured out that there are signals out there that allow companies to understand who's researching their products right now. That was a big one, right? So, as everything, as the dawn of the internet came along, all of a sudden, 70-80% of a research process, the way in which people evaluate and buy products, came online. And there's signals out there that you're able to, in a bunch of different ways and strategies we can talk about if it's useful for folks, in a bunch of different ways, you can make sense of those behavioral interactions and start to output companies that are researching your products. And of course, this isn't so much the who should I care about targeting? Who is my addressable market? This is the when, right? Of my entire addressable market, who should I be reaching out to right now? And so, yeah, it took a while for this data to kind of take hold because the way that the market interacts with it is much different than this kind of more foundational data, which is not static, it's temporal to a point, but intent data is always changing, in a lot of models on a weekly basis.
Right.
So yeah, that certainly changed the sophistication level or kind of the ceiling on what you could do with B2B data.
Great. So, so Mike, Manoj talked about, the origins being everything from handwritten lists into scanning yellow pages and that evolution. Is there a similar parallel in the world of intent data as far as the sourcing of that goes?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'd give credit to originally an individual publishing company folks may have heard of called TechTarget.
Mhm.
They were the first to look at their own kind of walled garden of kind of research behavior and say, hey, this data is valuable. Let's productize it. And then other publishers started doing that in their silos.
Mhm.
Right? There were other kind of like siloed signals that slowly became available. I think where Bombora and some others came along and thought differently was, hey, it's not just the data that we own. It's not just our myopic view of the world. There's a whole bunch of research behavior happening across the internet, and more is better. If you can organize it, if you can score it and weight it, you want more of it. Assuming that it's quality and that it's coming from places that are generating real B2B research behavior, more is better. So along the line, this kind of aggregation and scale came into play, so that instead of like this nice to have signal, it became something that could actually fuel a go-to-market, right?
Mhm.
You could feed a 200-person inside sales team. You could feed, a $3 million advertising budget with this intelligence. So over time, I think, we and others learned how to operate at scale and produce this data at scale.
Mhm. So that's a good kind of a segue to more is better, and that would kind of be my theme with the amount of data that's available now. So probably in the order of what came on the market first and what's easiest to get versus what's harder to get as you move on down. The firmographic data has been around for a long time. You can go in and do selects based on, company size and industry and so on. The personas, that has become very rich also in terms of not just titles, but what are their responsibilities, where do they sit in the organization, what level are they? Are they C-level, individual contributor level, et cetera? Technographics, if you're targeting somebody who has SAP install base, that data is really readily available out there now. And as you go down to news and alerts, funding initiatives, et cetera, and then into intent data, it just keeps getting better and better to be able to help you dial in on your ideal customer profile. So what I would say is the more you can reasonably get your hands on, the better, because it's really the combination of those layered on top of each other that adds tremendous value to get you to the center of the bullseye. So that's my answer. More is better. Anything else to add there, Manoj?
No, I agree with you. That layer that I was building, at the end of the day, contact is your last mile, right, within a company. But to Mike's point, like when should you talk to them, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Intent data gives you why should you talk to them, your news and events, funding announcement. Hey, they just raised money. Then let's just go talk to them. That means they have growth plans, right? So you need why, when, and how you contact them is where contact data comes in. Hey, here's an email, here's a phone number, let's go contact the person.
That is a critical point, Manoj, because certainly over the past 5 or 10 years, the whole area of taking this data and applying analytics and modeling and scoring and ranking to all of this data has allowed people to really get wrapped around parts of the funnel that never let you connect with how do you get the person on the phone? How do you get a proper email for them? And so that last mile is something never to ignore.
Yeah, absolutely.
So as people are out there trying to navigate this complex landscape of data providers and B2B data that's available, let's talk about some of the things that people should focus in on and make sure that they're addressing with the vendor. Manoj, what about data sourcing?
Yeah, so, I keep going back to the layer, company, news, and technographic. I think that data is pretty publicly available, right? Not to undermine the efforts that are required to collect the data, make sense out of that. There are companies in each of those categories, right? DNB has been focused on company data, firmographic, right? They have the DUNS number, where they have kind of standardized the world of companies. News, what seems like a very trivial problem to solve. When you actually start to solve it, it's a complex, because when you get the piece of news and then multiply that like millions of pieces that are coming in every single day, how do you take it? How do you categorize them into different buckets and associate that to a company or a person? It becomes very complex. And there are companies like our partner Euler that's in that space. But once again, publicly available data, technographic, same thing, publicly available data. When it comes to contact and intent, the data is not that publicly available, right? So I'll speak to contact and then hand over to Mike for intent data. The barrier to entry for anyone in the contact space is very low, right? You're a publisher, you have a list of contacts, let's just say CFOs, 10,000 CFO, you're in a business, you have contact data. You are an aggregator, you build 2, 3, 4, 5 sources together. You're a good software developer and a good hacker. You just go in and source public data, right? If you're not worried about crossing the boundary, right, the borderline, you just go scrape LinkedIn, right? And you see tons of companies, they get $1 million, $2, $3 million in revenue just by scraping LinkedIn, getting public data, or aggregating the list. But when it comes to getting the data at a volume that is significant enough for you to build a company, there are only a handful of companies that have large amount of data that's coming from ethical sources, right? I always tell our prospect and the clients, when they ask us, okay, there's so much of noise, there's all these companies, they say we have data, we have data, we have data, we have lists. What should we do? And I ask them, just ask your vendor one question: where does the data come from? Right? 99% of those companies will not have an answer for that, because they know either the list is very small or it's coming from questionable sources, right? The companies that have data at volume, especially contact data at volume, right? They have to have a firm foundation through which not only do they get data one time, but they keep getting the data on an ongoing basis. Like, for example, not to self-promote here, but SalesIntel, look, our data comes from our proprietary apps where millions of users are contributing because they're getting value every single day, right? That's why we stand on the solid foundation to say we are compliant with all the privacy regulations, because we are giving value back to the users, just like Waze. We all use Waze as a traffic app. I share my location, right, anonymously, because I get value from everybody else who's sharing their location, right? So in context work, I'd say the one question to ask your vendor is, where does the data come from? Mike, how about intent?
I think there's a couple. One is, with intent data, it's going to work really well for you or it's not. So I'd say, like, see if you can test it, feel it, and look at it, right? So start with 100 accounts that you want to sell to, and say, hey, tell me what you know about these accounts in relationship with my products. And a good intent data provider should be, it should be no problem, right? Like, the answer to that question should be yes. And then you should be able to look at that list that comes back. And if you're in opportunities with those companies, some of those companies should be on the list, right? Because the promise of intent data is that we're seeing that research process. So, ask them for samples and ask them if you can test the data. So I think that's kind of the most important question. And then I think, similar to Manoj, where the data comes from is important. So ask yourself, where does B2B research related to my product take place? Where is that happening? And can I listen to the intent data vendor and say to myself confidently, I think they're capturing that research process, right? It should be a simple value proposition. If it's an individual publisher like TechTarget or G2 Crowd, probably yes. There are probably customers on G2 Crowd that are accessing reviews, and intuitively you can say, hey, that's probably good intent data. If the answer to where does the data come from seems confusing, that's probably bad. It shouldn't be confusing. It should be easy and obvious that a vendor is witnessing B2B research. So those are, I would say, like, two kind of just like broad tips and questions to ask that'll probably put you in the right direction.
Good. Good. Well, I'll throw in my 2 cents around other important aspects, and this comes both from being a buyer of data over years and years, and also being a licensor of data. And every vendor necessarily has restrictions and limits around what you're enabled to do with their product. It's a really valuable IP. But the things you should ask yourself are, what is the user license model? Many of the vendors out there will have a license that's based on users. And that's fine. Everyone can understand the value that everybody having access to the platform can provide. But if you do a really good job at negotiating your deal up front, and then you go into a hyper-growth mode where you need to be adding seat after seat after seat, and you haven't done a good job negotiating that up front, what happens as you grow, you can really get caught with some escalating costs that you might not have budgeted for. So I would say, look at, if it's a seat-based model, make sure that you've got your growth planned in on that and that you know what that upgrade path looks like. The other thing is that, so a lot of vendors also charge by the amount of data that you're exporting from their system, which is a reasonable way to go. It makes sense, but there are vendors who also will limit how much you can even look at, whether or not you even touch it or take it out of the system. So make sure you look at the fine print on some of the license agreements and don't get surprised. There are also often restrictions on what information can be exported. So just because the information is visible on a screen, don't just assume that you're going to be able to hit a button and export all of that data. There definitely will be restrictions around that. Things that, this has nothing to do with strictly data business, but look for auto renewal clauses. I do see a lot of people that get caught by them, and I myself have been caught by them in the past. So just know what you're signing up for. And then last, if there are restrictions about what you can do with the data once your subscription has ended, there are some vendors who will ask that you simply delete all of the data that you've exported from their systems. And I always look at that like putting toothpaste back in the tube. It's very, very messy and not usually very successful. So take a look at what limitations there are around that aspect of it. And I think most importantly, everyone loves to throw around volumes and numbers and counts, but the real thing that counts is not how much there is, but how much is relevant for your personas and your ICP. So if somebody's got 500 million records worth of data, who cares? There's probably 100,000 in there that might be of interest to any one particular product or play. So make sure you're doing the selections based on things that are relevant to your sales motion. And then I would say that whether it's with intent data or contact data or any of the data out there, no vendor is ever going to have 100% of what you want. So Manoj and Mike, can you guys speak to what happens then?
Yeah, I can talk about the contact Elizabeth. Yes, I think normally when the clients look at database, the size matters in this case, right? They say, okay, you know how big is the database? But oftentimes, what they overlook to see is what data is relevant to them, right? And then if you look at like some of the smarter buyers, even they get fooled by the number. They come in and they say, okay, this is my ICP. I'm looking for companies in this geography or this industry and persona here. What's the database size? And they compare one versus the other. Even there, they get fooled because you may find that one platform has the larger count than the other, but what you are forgetting is that larger counts may not have email address or the phone numbers or in the world that we are living in, as Bob mentioned, that we're all where are we? All of us are dialing in from our homes, right? There isn't a direct dial. There isn't a phone number, a desk on my phone. But what I do have is this mobile phone, right? How many? Yes, you may find larger, counts of contact data in a platform versus the other. But when you distill down to, okay, how many of them have emails so I can take an action? How many of them have a cell phone number? You may find that the vendor who has slightly lower number at the surface actually is more effective than the vendor who had larger number at the face value. And the second question, second part of this is, as Elizabeth mentioned, no single vendor is going to have everything that you're looking for, right? So see if that vendor is truly your partner. Can they go and provide you a service to get the data that you're looking for, right? And just taking Mike's example, intent data example, what if I'm looking for a topic, but that doesn't exist? Can I partner with a company like Bombora that is going to go get that intent topic for me? Same thing, with once again, not to self-promote, but SalesIntel, which has the research on demands function, and that other companies call it on-demand research, right? Where that company is truly a partner of your sales and marketing teams to go get the data elements that are missing. So your sales and marketing team doesn't have to spend time, the most valuable time, researching the data.
Yeah, I think I'd echo everything, especially like this idea of, when companies quote how much of anything they have, it almost is irrelevant. Doesn't matter. I mean, and then there's like, you could debate how everyone's counting different things, how everyone's defining different things. It's irrelevant to any individual customer. So I think that's great advice, to focus in on what's really relevant to you. The other thing I've been thinking about lately, because we're going through an exercise at Bombora, is, sometimes there are elements of your customer base that are just really, really hard to capture from a data perspective. And I think the light bulb for me was, hey, that's good. Because if you can figure it out, if you can find a way to, define your total addressable market or your ICP, even though the data is really, really hard to get, then that can become a huge advantage to you. Right? I'll give you an example. So at Bombora, our really, really good customers have a strong alignment between sales and marketing. Right? They just have these teams that either the marketing team runs the SDR, BDR organization, or they're just really tied together and they're on the same page. They're doing innovative things together. This is an attribute there is no data for, but there's a bunch of hard work and kind of like roll up your sleeves, Mechanical Turk, consulting. You can actually get to a proxy for that type of company. And the harder the work to get there and figure it out from a data perspective, that's a barrier to entry that can be an advantage for you. So I would say, just from kind of a fluffy advice perspective, if it's hard or it seems difficult, good. Like really commit to figuring it out, because few will, and it can be a big advantage.
Great point. Great point. So whatever data you've got, the next step is really figuring out how do you leverage that within your ecosystem. And everyone's going to have CRM, marketing automation, email cadence tools, LinkedIn, all of these different systems. And what I would just suggest is you look at how much investment. It's going to be tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of investment in all of these other tools. And the one thing is at the bottom of it is the data. That's the fuel for absolutely everything. And so the evaluation that you do on that will be time well spent, because every other thing, it's like compounding interest, right? Every other thing that you do will be more valuable because of what's fueling it and what starts it. Manoj, what about the people side?
Yeah, without people on this data, there's nothing, right? you need you need good data. You need a good teams, and going back to my previous points, that you as an organization are spending a lot of time and efforts and resources on finding these people. From on a sales side, you have STR and account executives. On the marketing side, you have the demand gen folks, your brand people. Don't waste their time in having them go find data. Give them the data and the intelligence that they need to do their job, and give them in the platforms which they're already used to using, right? So they don't have to go to a third platform to go get. So when you're looking for a data provider, just make sure that they have the integrations with the systems that your people are using, so that the efficiency is right there.
Absolutely. And then the last point on that, whether it's integrated or not, there is a level of training and enablement and a real effort around driving usage, because it's going to be new information that people aren't used to having. They're not going to be used to certain workflows that are now possible. with the data that you're going to be providing. And it is really important that you invest in that and don't assume just because you determined that it's really valuable that everyone else is going to automatically figure that out on their own. You really do need to feed it to people and continue to reinforce it over time.
Yeah, I think the way to think about that is it's not always possible, but when it is, create alignment ahead of time by getting that data into some manual workflow, right? So let's say you're running a big SDR team and you want to try some mix of technographic data, intent data, and contact data. You know, run a pilot before you put all that data inside of CRM and integrate it and assume everyone will use it. Run a pilot with a few reps and put data behind the results and show that it works and get people excited. And then, you know, figure out the at scale automated workflow. Because if you don't have alignment, if everybody's not excited and bought in, you know, to your point, it's like, hey, that's a great idea by one person, but
Right.
you know, if no one else cares, then it's not going to go anywhere.
That's right. And Manoj, what about the issue of being able to ensure that whatever data you're bringing in, that you're continually scrubbing? I mean, I think the as Mike said, intent data changes constantly. Contact data turns over about 30% every year. So it's a constant battle, isn't it?
Yep, it is. It is. You know, there's a 3% of the data goes out of date, and this was pre-COVID, right? With this world that we're living in, you know, we have more turnarounds at the company. And I tell companies that, look, you already have a lot of data. Don't just focus on going and buying that list or getting this contact data at the top of the funnel. Harvest the data that you already have. 3% of your data is going out of date. Why not, you know, partner with somebody who can keep up with that rate of change of this data, so that not only do you not have to buy a lot of net new data, but you have the intelligence that's already sitting in your sales system. Intelligence is sitting already in your marketing automation system that you can now use, right? For example, if there's an existing customer who's in your CRM, right? If they change the job, would you rather not have your sales team go and contact the person in the new company? The chances are they're going to a company where your product is relevant, right? So not only you're getting the data, but you're also getting the intelligence that is already associated with the relationship that's already built in with that individual.
That's a great point. All right, so we promised we were going to end with a couple use cases. So Manoj, I think you were going to talk about inbound lead enrichment.
Yeah. So this goes back to the same point. You know, instead of buying the list, you know, optimize your inbound engine where you're getting the interest coming in. I know web form is a very natural way of collecting that data, but if you use your data vendor, if you leverage the data effectively, you can increase the conversion of your web visitors to actually the inbound leads, right? One example is, you know, have a very small form in here. All you need is email, right? A business email. Even if you don't have business email, even a personal email, there are associations that for at an identity level, like we provide B2B and B2C. Like if you come in mike@gmail.com, we'll tell you that's Mike Burton at Bombora, right? Now, all of a sudden, it's convenient for Mike to come in, say, I need this white paper or I need this demo, right? But at the back end, you have all the enrichment about who this individual is, so that you can do the lead routing effectively. You know whether this is the proper lead or not. You can score that lead effectively. And many more people of your web visitors are going to come and fill in that email address versus if you have 16 fields or even 6 fields there, right? The study says every additional field that you add on the form, you reduce your chances of form fill by 30%.
That's dramatic. Mike, you were going to talk about top of the funnel.
Yeah, sure. So one of the things we think about a lot is, you know, this idea of like sales and marketing working off of one aperture, right? So if there's a bullseye and we want salespeople calling on, you know, companies that have been to our website, who are showing lots of intent, who have the perfect technographics stack, who are right in our ICP, that's a small number of companies, but we want our salespeople focused there. Then from a top of funnel perspective, we want to use that same mix, that same kind of building blocks of that data set, and just, make it much wider, right? So instead of maybe they had to come to our website, maybe they're just showing third-party intent. And instead of maybe their bullseye ICP, they're in a little bit one of our secondary or tertiary industries, right? So I think that's kind of piece number one, is be working off the same playbook. On top of funnel, you need a lot more volume. At the bottom of the funnel, you need a lot less, but the playbook should be the same. And then, we also talk a lot about like taking that strategy bottoms up, right? So you could argue it either way, but it's a lot easier to figure out what's getting meetings, what is getting opportunities, what's getting bigger deal sizes, capture that data mix and open the aperture on that for top of funnel. So taking what's working in sales and replicating and expanding on it in marketing, versus, taking, potentially marketing's view of what the best customers are and pushing that down to sales. I think there's, like I said, good arguments for both, but where I've seen a lot of success and alignment and kind of, at scale go to markets, it usually works bottoms up. And then, once you figure all that out, it's about integrating at scale. So you need to find providers that have integrations into social platforms, ad platforms, data operations teams that can help you transport data to publishers and lead gen providers. So then you have to figure out the web of activation, which largely comes down to integrations and some other considerations. So hopefully that made sense. Is slight ramble.
No, it sure did. It sure did. I like the bottoms up approach too, because I'm usually on that side of the sales motion on outbound selling. And one of the things that I think, if anybody walks away with a message from this, it's really thinking about how the combination of all these data elements really let you dial in on the right people at the right time. So I was imagining with one of our customers, somebody that was servicing the property and casualty world, and they were looking for people in risk and compliance who wanted to do analytics around that area at companies that had $1 billion or more in revenue. And they really only wanted to talk to people in a certain department that were VP level and above. And ideally, only if they had actually been searching for information on that. And if you rewound to 25 years ago when I started my career and somebody told me that you could actually dial in on that like that with data that is off the shelf today, I don't think I would have ever believed in it. But it is, it's nirvana. It's miraculous. And the more that you've got to layer on there, the better. One other thing I'll say about the data that's out there now, Manoj touched on mobile and text. And certainly 5 years ago, if I got a cold call on my mobile phone, my first reaction is, this is my cell phone. And I was just, it was an assault. And nowadays, my dentist texts me. If I'm getting my hair done, they text me. Everybody texts. People are used to it, and people actually appreciate the convenience of it. Our customers are seeing really, really good results reaching people on mobile phones and using text as a communication platform. So I would say any channel, especially nowadays, is a viable channel for you to use, and don't be afraid of it. Be smart about it, but don't be afraid. And then I would say that the intent and the alerts, if you're only using that to identify targets, you're missing a trick there, because it's really how you can have a much smarter and more relevant conversation, which eventually will result in a lot more conversions. And last point is, as Mike said, if the data is hard to get, commit to getting it. It's worth getting it. And it's not a mountain you have to climb alone. You can absolutely leverage vendors out there to help you source and find that hard to get data. So that brings us to the end of our use cases. And I'd like to open the floor to any questions, or ask if anybody's got some other inputs or ideas that they'd like to bring to the table.
This was great. I learned a ton, but we're not gonna let the participants off the hook quite yet. So we're going to have them actually take a poll that we decided to create just a minute ago. And the poll is asking them this question, if we could launch the poll, based on today's briefing, all the things you heard, how would you rate where your data strategy and implementation is today on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being not good at all or a beginner, and 10 being, oh, we got this nailed down as an expert. So let's go ahead, everyone take this poll. Click on one of the numbers where you think you stand. I'm going to give myself a 3. I just submitted a 3. That's being honest and transparent. So please go ahead and take the poll, and we'll give it just a minute. And in the meantime, chat in, use the chat. What's one thing you learned today? What's something that was new to you that you learned that you might consider implementing? Just chat that in, if you will. And I know we have a lot of salespeople on the line. Do I have to resort to giving a spiff to the first person?
I do want to point out before I end this poll and share that there is one person who is an expert. And if it is somebody other than our 3 speakers today or Mr. Matt Nash, I would like you to turn your video on and tell us about being an expert. So I'll go ahead and end it now here, Bob.
Okay, what are the poll results? Let's share those. And oh, wow, we had, it looks like everybody's a 7, which isn't bad. We had one expert though, Cameron, you're right. A lot of 1, 2, and 3. So that's 40%, 47. How about this? More than 50% were 5 or below. If any of you need some help, please reach out to one of the panelists here. We'll get you connected and taken care of for sure. But who was that 10, Cameron? Do we even know? I don't think we know.
I'll throw myself out there. I was the 10. I think we have
All
a
right.
pretty solid data strategy.
I will say I have had many dealings with Matt in his intent data conversations, and he is an expert. So I give him that.
Thank you, Cameron.
Yes, anytime.
Again, I'm still waiting on
Confidence.
someone to chat in. One thing you learned today that maybe it will help you in the future. And what might that be? All right. I think we have somebody maybe chatting in here. Don't all raise your hand at once, though, for sure. I want to thank our panelists. I want to thank SalesIntel, and particularly for being a partner and a sponsor, supporting the ISP. Our mission is to get better at what we do, and data and knowing who to call and when is definitely a piece of getting better. So we appreciate that. Let's see, can this presentation somehow be shared on the AISP website? And Cameron will answer that one, I think, if she's still.
Yep, I was just typing it in there. So the replay, both the recording and the slides will be posted to the Knowledge Center later this afternoon, and you'll get an email with a link to go access that.
Laura mentioned every field you add, or I think he said reduces from form completion by 30%. That was a really good thing. We always knew not to have too long of forms, but I didn't know that it was that drastic. That's very good. Thank you from Len. You're welcome. And any final closing comments from anyone on the presenters panel at all?
No, I would just say we really appreciate the opportunity, and everyone stay healthy.
All right.
See you guys.
Thanks.
Everyone.
Thanks,
Bye,
everyone. Take care.